my fellow freedom low-solving thinkers. Thank you for tuning in to LO3 Podcast. My name is Craig, transmitting from the beautiful swampy Mango, South Florida, and today's date is Wednesday, March 31st, 2021. Ooh, man, I'm just like going through so much stuff here right now, and it's just pure insanity. It looks like there's more cases in New York City of people are being victims of crime that are mainly Asians, American. And it's happening in a lot of other places. How come the news don't talk about that? Well, the folks in Atlanta, white supremacy, right? That's the big term. If you disagree, you're a white supremacist. This is how dumb and pathetic these juvenile hacks want you to buy. It's like going back into the 70s. People are going to sit there and watch. Well, something like that happened with Joseph Lozito as well. Who almost got stabbed to death in the subways of New York as well. And what the police officers do, they went in their cubby hole, never came out. Looks like a lot of folks haven't learned a damn thing about the police protection myth. Technically, they are not obligated on protecting an individual. You're watching some of the video footage. One security guard just saw his one victim, got kicked to the ground. The assailant walked away, he just closed the door. Shows you true masculinity. Talk about higher standards when people tell me about a city like that. Well, I'm from Brooklyn, New York. I can be highly critical about it. Wherever you do, folks, if you come up there from that area and you move down here, leave your garbage infections up there. I see that happening a lot. People like to ram their mouths and so forth. So that's an unethical thing. When you see folks out there getting beat on, doesn't matter what they look like. Of course, the mainstream garbage media don't care. What's convenient for them? They love exploitation. They love the climax on getting ratings. Like with the George Floyd trial. Another socially engineered event. Of course, everyone's still saying the ex-officer's guilty, don't matter. I still wasn't too keen on the whole entourage. Like if you heard my shows in the past about it, we got to see how much more information is coming out. And what happened was they decided to defund, and what happened? Welcome to blowback. And it's not knocking the police as a whole. It's just find it disturbing. Got your good and bad folks, like everything else. Of course, there's a report. I was just checking some of the shows. Lisa Haven did a show, an episode about de-radicalizing Christians. Other countries are doing it. You know what? We don't think like that. When these ungrateful maggots, technocrats, and their minions. Don't bring your garbage forward, influential garbage here either. John Jay warned us about that in Federalist Papers 2 through 5, plus George Washington's farewell address. Yes, you got a bunch of status hacks that claim to be Christians. I remember there's one person who didn't wear a mask in the service of the Catholic Church in Dallas. Called the police on her. She had her first 1-year-old with her. and and she's pregnant. Bunch of cowards. Christ says stuff like that. They're just nothing more than a den is a den of thieves. Very similar to the money changers. Remember, 501c3 churches are state institutions, not constitutional facilities. They sold their soul to the state. And the Roman Catholic Church is just one of them. Do I want to condemn all Catholics? Absolutely not. Many churches are like that. All you got to do is do the homework. Hushmoney.org is a good site to go to. You'd be surprised. 501c3s churches are unconstitutional. Period. Well, positive things are happening too. With the Million Maskless March, is getting a lot of press. Seen a few newspapers are talking about it, which is fantastic. They're having one too at the same day around 3 p.m. supposedly, or 1 p.m. at the Orlando Amphitheater. It's supposed to happen in Orlando. That's good. I like that a lot. Don't get me wrong, folks. They're not anti-mask completely. They respect the vulnerable, the elderly, and so forth. But too many people, whether it's to the state or some administrative bureaucrat, have to wear a burqa over our faces. Sharia law light, one person called it, said it to Sabel Edmonds from Newsbuzz, and guy was spot on. Sharia law light. So hopefully, folks, you make it. Just look at this. I know they have one in Fort Lauderdale. It's supposed to be on the 10th. We'll be on the 10th from 3 p.m. and end around 5. Any mask you got there, you want to destroy or burn, bring it. Screw the landfills. Just burn it to oblivion. It's getting a little bit very ridiculous. And even those reports too, now people are taking the COVID shots, and they could be found positive a few weeks later. Remember, coronavirus is considered a vaccine anyway. What Bill and Melinda Gates funded. So, yeah. Don't fall for the hype, folks. Do your homework completely instead of listening to the pundits on the news. Rather, it's on the idiot tube, sometimes the internet, and radio. Do a little more homework. Educate yourselves. Always remain vigilant on your health. Yeah, it's funny because I was looking through this article by BeckerNews.com, and it talks about the top 10 cities for mass shootings, all of them run by Democratic Party. I'm not going to be talking about this, but I'll just give you little ranks here. I will definitely put it online. The footnotes on here. It's very interesting. It's in a database from massshooting.info, but I'll give you at least the top 10 cities with mass shootings, starting from 1 to 10. Chicago, Philadelphia, New York City, Houston, Baltimore, Detroit, Washington, D.C., New Orleans, Atlanta, and St. Louis. They all have in common, they're mainly, majority of them that run it are represented by the Democrats. Interesting that, huh? Interesting. But the gun control fanatics don't want you to know that, including technocratic Ted Deutsch. Talks like this, he has all masculine, not witch hunt people. Absolutely. So I'll leave that. I'll leave the footnotes on that one for sure. So guys can check it out. However, I'm going to be talking about a couple articles here. This one came from The Verdict, Justia.com. Sidney Powell follows a brief embracing fact-free politics. And it's by what Michael C. Dorfhasse came out today. Posted under Speech and Religion. In the aftermath of last year's defeat at the polls, Donald Trump had difficulty finding reputable and competent lawyers to assist him in attempting to persuade the public, judges, and other government officials of his big lie. That he was the rightful winner of the 2020 presidential election. One lawyer who did represent Trump first officially, then as a freelancer, was Sidney Powell, who was at one time a respected federal prosecutor. By 2020, however, it was clear that Powell was no longer in top form. Both in and out of court, she made a wild and demonstrably false claims. So it's going to be a little bit biased here, folks. So, hey, I'm not taking sides on this, but we guys go look at this together. Observe responsibly, of course. Some of these claims concern Dominion Voting Systems, a Denver-based corporation that makes machines that count paper ballots. For example, Powell falsely claimed that Dominion had rigged the election, that Dominion was created in Venezuela to rig elections for Hugo Chavez, and that Dominion bribed Georgia officials for no big contract. That quotation comes from the complaint in the defamation lawsuit Dominion filed against Powell in January of this year. The 124-page document lays out in detail how Powell repeatedly made probably false claims about Dominion. It also describes some of the harm that resulted to Dominion employees, some of them who received death threats from Trump supporters who heard and believed Powell's lies, as well as to the company itself. The complaint seeks over $650 million in compensatory damages and an equal amount in punitive damages. So they want to clean her out. Last week, Powell's lawyers filed a motion to dismiss that was widely mocked because it argues that Powell's statements about Dominion were so unbelievable that they could not constitute defamation. To the uninitiated at least, that sounds more like an admission of culpability than a defense. Powell's motion to dismiss the case should fail, but the argument presented in her brief is more subtle than is generally acknowledged. The operative principles of law in this area do indeed sometimes provide a defense to defamation liability for the lies that are so preposterous that no one can take them seriously. So too, the law provides sweeping protection for statements of political opinion. As Powell's brief also contends, the core difficulty for Powell is that neither of those principles has much to do with her case. So it's interesting about that because they're going to try to sue her, put her on bankruptcy, and hang her dry. Well, it's interesting about this author so far, Mr. Dorff. He's just just calling her, criticizing her a little bit. There's some criticism here. And think Joe Biden was such a great candidate, and Kamala Harris, they're a fantastic team. Well, Mr. Dorff, I'll say this. Explain to me what the garbage is going on right now. How come President Biden did not receive his, address his first, didn't speak at his first State of the Union address? What was that about? So, how come you have someone like Kamala Harris not that swift? I'll continue on. The First Amendment, libel is written defamation, slander is spoken defamation. Both are governed by tort law, but because they concern expression, the First Amendment limits their scope. Thus, in New York Times Company v. Sullivan, the Supreme Court ruled that a public official plaintiff in a defamation lawsuit must prove then that the defendant made a false statement and damaged the plaintiff's reputation. The common law definition. Public officials must prove actual malice, a standard requiring at least reckless disregard for the truth. Cases following Times v. Sullivan extended this rule to cover public figures as well as public officials. Powell's motion to dismiss contends that Dominion is a sort of public figure to which the actual malice test applies. That contention is more than a little bit ironic, if not hypocritical. After all, Trump has 4 years advocates opening up the libel laws, and by which he means eroding the protection against defamation liability provided by Times v. Sullivan. Meanwhile, earlier this month, conservative D.C. Circuit Judge Lawrence Silberman echoed conservative D.C. Judge Lawrence Silberman echoed conservative Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas, called to overrule Time v. Sullivan. Yet, even though the president whose lies she amplified, an elite conservative jurist want to discard Time v. Sullivan, Powell invokes is the defense of her service to Trump. You see, like the witch hunting here still, to an extent. Of course, there's no law against hypocrisy in any way. There's no good reason to discard Time v. Sullivan. Therefore, so long as the president remains on the books, Powell is as entitled as anyone to rely on it. The more important question here is why she and her lawyers think it aids her case. One thing is not entirely clear that Dominion is a public figure. Unlike corporations that are household names, few people had even heard of Dominion before Powell and her ilk made their wild claims about it. In any event, whether Dominion counts as a public figure for Times v. Sullivan proposes makes no difference to the outcome. A regular plaintiff can prevail in a defamation action by showing that the defendant made a reputation-damaging false statement. A public figure or public official plaintiff must show more, namely that the defendant knew the statement was false or was reckless with respect to its truth. Here, Powell's motion to dismiss admits, indeed celebrates, that she knew what she was saying about the Dominion was false. Her chief defense is that her statements are so outlandish and obviously false that no reasonable person could understand Powell to be making factual statements at all. So it's interesting here. So I'll continue on, as we shall see that defense fails. But the crucial point here is that the public figure status of Dominion is completely irrelevant to the positions Powell's motion takes, which is that she did not make any statements of fact at all. If that's right, she wins. But if she's wrong, if her statements are fact, then she loses even on the assumption that Dominion is a public figure, because she will have admitted to deliberately stating falsehood. That's fair enough. If Times v. Sullivan is irrelevant to Powell's defense, on what does that defense rest? Her motion to dismiss relies on too many ideas. Distinction between facts and opinions, and that assumption that political lies are entitled to First Amendment protection. Let us consider these ideas in turn. Opinions and facts. One of the sequel to Times v. Sullivan, the 1974 Supreme Court ruling in Gertz v. Robert Welch, Inc., the justices proclaim under the First Amendment there's no such thing as a false idea. However, pernicious an opinion may seem, we depend for its correction not on the conscience of judges and juries, but on the competition of other ideas. Powell's motion to dismiss repeatedly claims that the allegedly defamatory statements to which Dominion points were protected opinion, but not statements of fact. The claim borders on the absurd. One cannot evade liability by couching an otherwise defamatory statement of fact as an opinion. The Supreme Court said exactly in that Milkovich versus Lorraine Journal Company, quoting Judge Henry Friendly, from whom Chief Justice John Roberts served as a law clerk as a young lawyer, and Chief Justice Rehnquist, from whom Roberts also clerked, wrote that it would be destructive of the false of libel if a writer could escape liability for accusations of defamatory conduct simply by using explicitly or implicitly the words "I think." Milkovich involved the question whether the federal First Amendment requires an opinion exception to defamation law. The court answered no, but allowed that a state could go further to protect opinion by raising the bar for defamation liability in opinion cases. The Powell motion to dismiss claimed that Colorado has done just that. As a threshold matter, it is not clear that the Colorado law even applies. Dominion sued the District of Columbia, relying on D.C. law. Let us nevertheless assume, for the sake of the argument, that under the relevant principles of what lawyers call choice of law, the law of Colorado governs because Dominion is based there. Even so, Colorado law is not as wildly defamation defendant friendly as Powell's motion to dismiss suggests. And Colorado, as in some other states, are more likely to treat as an opinion as even that companies of fact on which it based at the statement standing alone. That makes some sense. Imagine two cases. Doug says Peter is a pedophile. David said Peter had an affair with a 20-year-old when Peter was in his 60s. So Peter is a pedophile. Assuming that Peter is not, in fact, a pedophile, as that term is conventionally understood, Doug, but not David, defames Peter. Even though both Doug and David utter the words Peter is a pedophile, when David says that he does not literally mean Peter has sex with or is attracted to young children. Because of the added factual context, David's statement characterized Peter with a 20-year-old as morally equivalent to pedophilia. It can thus be deemed opinion. What about Sidney Powell's statements? Did she include that number of statements of fact indicating that her wildest claims about Dominion were merely hyperbolic characterizations of those facts? Not at all. To be sure, Powell's motion to dismiss asserts that she disclosed the facts upon which her conclusions were based, pointing to a binder of material she included in various lawsuits and published on a website. But as Dominion complaint, to which that assertion is completely inadequate, response notes in paragraphs 149 through 158, the binder itself contained actionable falsehoods, and Powell made additional false statements of fact that were not in any way mere elaborations, characterizations, or conclusions drawn from the statements in the binder. Thus, Powell is not at all like David in my hypothetical example, unless we add further detail that show that David would have defamed Peter. Suppose, for example, that Peter did not, in fact, have an affair with a 20-year-old or anyone else. And suppose further that in addition to falsely accusing Peter of pedophilia via an affair he did not have, David is also falsely accuses Peter of being a drug dealer, then David will be like Sidney Powell. So it's just, this is court typical viewpoints here. Does anything go in politics? Powell's motion to dismiss stakes a great deal to the political context of the case because Powell was acting as an attorney in an intensely partisan contest. The motion asserts both state and federal law courts should be highly reluctant to hold her accountable. Can that be right? Powell's attorneys are correct that the courts are and should be careful before making statements about politics the basis for defamation liability, lest we thereby chill robust political debate. But the motion to dismiss plainly goes too far. The complaint alleges quite credibly that Powell knowingly and repeatedly made false statements about Dominion that she intended her audience to believe, and that millions of them did, including some who attempted to overthrow the government on January 6th. More importantly, for present purposes, Dominion credibly alleges that a consequence of Powell's baseless campaign against the company has suffered reputational damage that will cost hundreds of millions of dollars. Is that the price we pay for wide open debate? In short, no. In the 2012 case of United States versus Alvarez, Justice Kennedy, writing for Supreme Court plurality, allowed the First Amendment does not permit the government to forbid political speech simply because it's false. Some political lies the court held are entitled to free speech protection, but even the four-justice plurality opinion, which was more protective of falsehoods than the positions espoused by other members of the court, did not say that all political lies are protected. On the contrary, to plurality distinguished the law at issue in Alvarez from conventional defamation liability, subject to the Times versus Sullivan test, which is essentially affirmed by simply even political speech can be the basis for defamation liability. Nothing in the tort of Colorado or any other state or the District of Columbia says otherwise. Yes, the relevant bodies of law demand sensitivity to political context of speech, but they permit liability where deliberate falsehood targets and damage the plaintiff's reputation. Under the federal law civil procedure, the district court ruling on a motion to dismiss must assume that the factual allegations of the complaint are true. Applying that standard, Sidney Powell blatantly defamed Dominion. If she cannot help be liable for defamation on the facts alleged here, there's no one speaking on politically charged issues can ever be held liable. Whereas Trump wanted to open up the libel laws, Powell's approach, if accepted, would completely shut them down. The district court should follow neither course. In order to Dominion fully prevail, the district court need not open up or shut down the law of defamation. It need only apply that law. And it's interesting about him because he did interesting about this gentleman, dorfonlaw.org. He is a professor of law at Cornell, co-author most recently of Beating Hearts, Abortion and Animal Rights. Interesting there. So I haven't made any judgment, but we can say so based on this article, he's a little bit left-leaning, you can say. But one of the things I could tell everyone here, and his comments are closed. I guess he don't want to have all Trump supporters go after him, right? But one thing I could say for sure, there's a lot of questions right now on this presidential election. Election fraud, voter suppression, what we call election tampering. You can use that too. It's been going on for such a long time. And even when since the hanging Chad drama happened in the year 2000, they decided to have digital style electronic balloting. I was boldly opposed that. And now look what happened. A lot of questions, folks. And I was even looking at Mike Lindell's documentary on that. He had people from those areas that made a statement based on their own investigation, stating that, it was these ballots were done in bad faith. That's why when people ask me about absentee, I've been doing that since the whole electronic balloting. I say, I'm not too crazy about it. And the Dominion has to back up their case as well. That's the thing. And if Sidney Powell's team got those facts and bring in their experts and got all the merits, that could open up a can of worms against Dominion. So that's why you always got to look at those angles for sure. You got to look at all sides of the matter. But it is going to be an interesting case, and can't leave these people hang to dry. Got to support them if we can, one way or the other. That'll be the choice is yours. And now look what's happening. Projection fetish. All going after all those dingleberries, going after these particular people. They just actually dress themselves how filthy and corrupt they are. And I'll say I was proud I never voted for Joe Biden. I knew his 47 years of stupidity in politics was very tyrannical. But I will never wish him any ill will. He's just someone's bellboy for the higher-ups. Question I have for these individuals. Why did President Biden ever pursue his first Union State of Address? Something to question. We'll see how far this baby goes. Just to let you folks know, I'm at downtown. Some downtowner located at 10 South New River Drive East. That's what it's called, South New River Drive East. In the heart of Fort Lauderdale, Florida, along the New River, near the courthouse and county jail. Good folks here. Looks like they have a little jump. I'm going to do those little oldie but goodie jams. And it's all well and good. Alright, I'm going to do one more here. Gaslighting. How leftist totalitarians demonize and demoralize their opposition. This is what Brandon Smith has to say. Psychopaths are not very complicated people. We all know the common signs of psychopathy, including a complete lack of empathy, the obsessive desire for dominance, the use of physical and psychological violence to gain control over others, and a narcissistic need to appear superior to everyone else, even when they are inferior to most. I know that for sure. I see it right in their eyes, and they hate people like me. And I have no shame to say that. Despite the Hollywood tends to glamorize them as brilliant predators with diabolical minds, psychopaths in most cases lack any imagination or creative capacity. They often score on an average on IQ tests and rarely exhibit genius-level intelligence. Their thirst for attention and validation make them prone to revealing their own crimes, and they usually end up thwarting themselves in the long run. That said, some have developed methods for infiltrating society. Throughout history, people with psychopathic traits often climb to the top of society's power structure, from aristocracy to monarchy to corporate and political oligarchy. As noted, it's not because they are necessarily smarter than an average person, but they do learn from trial and error what works and what doesn't when trying to control others. A common assumption about psychopaths is that they are incapable of working with others or organizing for mutual gain. This is simply nonsense. In reality, numerous studies have shown that psychopaths are adept at finding their own kind in a crowd and working together as predators. This usually develops into a kind of hierarchy in which higher functioning psychopaths will lead groups from lower functioning psychopaths. A good example would be organized crime such as cartels, sex traffickers, online scamming groups, and religious cults. Almost all psychopaths are inherited cowards. They will rarely pick on anyone their own size. By extension, smarter psychopaths will seek to exploit other people to do their dirty work for them. So some of these exploitable people also display elements of narcissism or sociopathy and are willing participants in schemes of the psychopaths. The rest are useful idiots that have been conned into thinking that they are doing good by serving the psychopath's interests. The worst case scenario is fully recognized or organized psychopath. The advent of totalitarian culture in which psychopathic behavior is rewarded and defended by those in authority or influence, while honesty, morality, and liberty are punished. So, in other words, cater to the weak and the pathetic and punish the productive. Full-blown psychopaths are rare, around 1% of the population. But there is no doubt that if a power structure exists within culture, these people almost always have their way to the top of it and co-opt it. They also find their way to organizations that pose as philanthropic or promote activism but lack transparency and oversight. Sounds familiar? From governments to nonprofit groups to elitist foundations, you will find a concentration of psychopaths compared to the rest of the public. They do this through nepotism. They help other psychopaths to protect each other from discovery. They also use numerous tactics to undermine and destroy any group they see as a threat to their position of power. Today, we don't worry so much about monarchy or atrocity. Instead, organized psychopaths have chosen the cult of socialism, social justice, fake environmentalism, and leftist ideology as their vehicles for control. Essentially, we are dealing with modernized version of communism. And if we examine current leftist and globalist movements, we will see a lot of similarities to historic communism along with psychopathic behaviors. For example, the use of gaslighting as a weapon is a classic communist mainstay. The basic definition of gaslighting is a manipulation of a person by psychological means into questioning their own sanity. In other words, making a sane person believe they might be insane. This, however, is not an adequate explanation of gaslighting. It's not only about questions of sanity, it is also about questions of principle and morality. The communist Soviet Union was notorious for gaslighting the public with propaganda that suggested anyone who questioned the will of the state and who demanded freedom was mentally ill. The Czechoslovak police and the KGB had special hospitals set aside for political dissidents called Pekushkas, excuse me. People who were critical of the status quo were immediately disappeared and sent to these facilities after being accused of mental instability. In Maoist China, especially during the Cultural Revolution, Mao targeted impressionable and gullible Chinese youth, brainwashed them into believing there was an institutional imperialism hiding within the Chinese society. The stability of communism in China was under question at the time, and Mao knew rebellion was possible. So instead of immediately cracking down with the military, he encouraged Chinese academics and youth to rebel and bring down the imperialists. And he redirected the social discontent and aimed it at non-existent ghosts so that the rebellion would never rise up against him and Politburo. Something like Pol Pot did in Cambodia during the killing fields. Gaslighting in China was pervasive. Any person that held to be the most remote belief in freedom, free markets, business, private property, or anyone that had any objection to the crimes of the communists was forced to undergo a trial, a kangaroo court called the struggle session. During the struggle session, a dissident was sometimes apprehended or sometimes shamed and compelled to stand before a large crowd of true believers in the communist faith. The crowd would browbeat them with accusations of criminality and immorality, trying to convince them of the evil of their ways. If they bowed and submitted to the collective begging forgiveness, then they might be allowed to live, but they had to believe they had sinned. They had fully adopted communist ideology and plead for absolution. Mind Control 101. Many victims that underwent the struggle for such struggle sessions continue to believe they are criminals for the rest of their lives. They believe that they were terrible people, even though they had no idea why they were punished in the first place. Gaslighting is a powerful device for public subjugation because it makes good people who love freedom think they are evil people that need to be controlled. It is also a way for a corrupt system to maintain dominance of the general public because it normalizes psychopathic behavior and suppresses moral conscience by convincing people that morality is relative or a matter of perspective. And that abuse and destructive behavior is necessary. In order to achieve a better world, if you can discombobulate a population to question right from wrong, then you can prevent them from ever rebelling against you. These are tried and true methods of psychopaths. If you ever wonder why abused spouses or family members stay with and defend their abusers, it is because psychopaths use gaslighting to disarm their victims. If you are crazy, if your position on morality is in doubt, then you maybe aren't being abused at all. Maybe you're being saved and protected. And if you lashed out and defend against the abuser, now you are truly a horrible human being. You are now a danger to society. You are now a terrorist. Familiar, folks? Yeah, man. All you gotta do is watch the Idiot Box, right? I see this control tactic everywhere in Western societies right now. The Capitol building protest is a perfect example. Millions of law-abiding Americans have been abused and oppressed by the establishment through lockdowns, and censorship, while groups of leftists like BLM and Antifa are allowed to run rampant across the country, looting and burning as they go. Conservative Americans reacted with a protest after the election, seeing that such abuses were likely to be aided by the federal government under Biden. They raided the Capitol building to make a point, and they peacefully left. Afterward, the media bombarded us for months the narrative that the Capitol protest was actually an insurrection, an act of domestic terrorism. So BLM gets to loot and burn their way through dozens of American cities and call it peaceful protesting. Conservatives protest at a single building and bust through the doors, and it's considered an act of war. Yes, you hear guys like Charles Schumer, Pinocchio, myself, talking about these things. They call it the temple of democracy. Well, it's not a temple of democracy. Even in our Constitution, can't find that word. It was a temple of Sodom and Gomorrah. The rate these are going politically speaking. All right? 5 deaths attributed to the event were blamed on protesters as yet. As it turned out, 3 of them were due to natural medical conditions, and there is still no evidence that the other ones were caused by conservatives at the scene. Exactly. They're not talking about it. There's no actual evidence. All they do is this rhetoric. Under the pandemic mandates, a vast portion of the U.S. was shut down and hundreds of thousands of small businesses were lost. Anyone who has disagreed with these measures has been called a conspiracy theorist and a danger to others. Of course, now we know that the death rate of COVID-19, according to scientific studies, is a paltry 0.26% outside of nursing homes. We know that lockdowns were completely useless in controlling the spread of the virus, as states with the harshest mandates had the highest infection rates. And finally, we know that masks are also useless in controlling the spread of the disease, according to scientific studies and common sense observation. Rather than admitting that lockdowns are pointless and masks do nothing, establishments, hacks like Anthony Fauci have continued to double down on their doom mongering when it comes to COVID. And the media continues to label anyone that points out the real science as conspiracy theorists. And how about all the institutional racism and Asian hate crimes being discussed in the news lately? The phrase white supremacy is being repeated ad nauseum, and of course the terrible evil is attributed to conservatives in particular. Set aside the fact that millions of conservatives are brown and black. Set aside the fact that the majority of hate crimes targeting Asians were actually perpetrated by black people, as I noted in the last week's article. And one of them is even a known black BLM activist. The race baiting used by leftists in the past few years is a prime example of gaslighting, telling people they're responsible for evils had nothing to do with and are completely unrelated to them. And they use a thing called projection. They're talking about themselves by pointing their finger at others. In Colorado, numerous blue check mark morons on Twitter, some of them mainstream journalists, came out to admonish the horrible white terrorist and obvious Trump supporter that killed 10 people in a Boulder grocery store. That wasn't until they found out the man was actually a Muslim from Syria who killed only the white people. Instead of apologizing for the idiocy, the media doubled down on their gaslighting, claiming the shooter should be considered a victim because he says he was bullied as a child for his religion. In other words, white people and conservatives are still to blame for the deaths. After the embarrassing revelation, conservatives are now passing around the hashtag he is Muslim, arranged by this U.S. Representative Ilhan Omar argued that no one was passing around the hashtag he is Christian over the shooting of Passage parlors in Georgia. If Omar actually took time to think before opening her mouth, maybe she should have realized that the mainstream media was already tying the Georgia shooter's skin color and religions to his crimes. After the Boulder shooting, the media has been glossing over the fact that Al-Awali Alessa is a Muslim, a hard leftist, and a violent bully to his classmates and family. We don't need a hashtag the Georgia shooter, sweetheart, because no one is trying to cover up or ignore who the shooter is. But then again, maybe Omar is well aware of the hypocrisy of her statements, and she just doesn't care. And just to let you know, folks, many people call her Infidel Ilhan. She's a hypocrite in her own creed. Yes, a Mino, Muslim in name only. That's Ilhan for you, the infidel that she is. And if you supporters get offended, I don't care. Like most leftists and totalitarians, the goal here is not to be right. The goal is to win, and to win by any means necessary. That means gaslighting half the population of the U.S. into think our values of freedom and meritocracy are somehow inherently evil. It means we must be convinced to flagellate ourselves for the rest of our lives for the original sin of whiteness, even though many conservatives are not white. Understand there are only three ways that brainwashing and gaslighting of conservatives will stop. One, we submit to embrace the false narrative as if it's true and give in to psychological slavery. Two, we separate completely from leftist totalitarians and organized psychopaths and go on our way. And three, we remove the psychopaths from the pictures and rebuild. Until one of these three things happen, like all psychopaths, leftists, and globalists will continue to seeking to wear us down. Is that what they do? They have seen it work in the past. And now, the Aquarian Age, Age of Enlightenment, the Information Age, we have the opportunity to expose these ungrateful psychic vampires and put them into shame, get them in for treason with due process. I can see these individuals everywhere. That's why I laugh at these bobbleheads. Trying to tell us how to live, think, and clean our own butts and can't even do it themselves. I say kill your television. Don't get caught in their brainwashing, mind control propaganda machine. That's all it is. Every time I see some mainstream news, I just laugh. It's a comedy show. I don't get angry. I just get inspired. That's how you got to be. Observe responsibly. Don't support a different wing from the other, because they all came from the same buzzard. How accurate is this information? Yep. And they're still doing the same crap over and over and over again. And of course, you got folks, they get gaslighted, and they go on, they all become social media geniuses. Can't even tie their own shoelaces, but they'll have someone contemplate for them. So I'm a Jim Jones, my Lord and Savior. Give me that great brand of Kool-Aid, please. But we all know, too, a lot of rains are going down, so it's a good thing. And realistically, everyone that buys it is not the majority. A lot of us want to be left alone. We always got to remain vigilant. Well, I can tell you this, folks. We can prevail. It's okay to mock them, ridicule them, put them on a camera. Hey, Ilhan, how's it feel being a globalist crap bag? Or infidel Ilhan? How's it feel being a Muslim in name only? Let's see how she reacts. Give them a lot more what they deserve. But none of these individuals care about you, regardless of your race, color, creed, etc. If you're in this bandwagon, her conform parade, rallying around these psychopaths, you're just a number to them. Useless eaters. Pawns of their machine. They will take you out without thinking twice. That's why, folks, liberty is the answer to this tyranny. And I hope people can try to defend psychopathic propaganda. Convince me. You'll lose. I say that with love. And that will be it. I thank everyone for listening. Plus, feel free to download and share us throughout your social media networks. If you have any questions, comments, if there's something interesting you want to check out, whatever you do, please send your correspondence to Quorum. Furthermore, I'll leave the footnotes of these articles on my speaker page. If you want to contact me, email me at lookyourlucknumbers03@protonmail.com. Or if you want to do donations, you can hit me at paypal.me or cash.app/lookyourluck3. And if you want to, support Justia or Bob Livingston's Alerts, that'd be very cool. Good people. And even Brandon Smith, too. Good guys. So, I always appreciate their content. Once again, thank you for your time, but always remember that demoniac resistance is healthy for the soul and can liberate humanity. Until next time, take care of yourselves. Keep on spreading the love. And may your guardian spirits be with you.